Hey everybody, Alex here. We're going to go ahead and get started with the bench press video. So we're going to get all into how to teach the bench press for specifically Special Olympics powerlifting. We're doing this in partnership with Empower You, so we can go ahead and get as many resources out there when it comes to adaptive training and specifically Special Olympics powerlifting. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into how to teach the bench press. We'll be going through 5 layers of teaching, but the first thing that you have to understand before getting to the teaching is exactly what the bench press is. We are going to go ahead and utilize powerlifting rules for this for the very simple reason that we're talking about competing in powerlifting. The rules for that are a little more involved for the bench than it is with the squat or the deadlift. So there are a few things that are required when it comes to the bench. One of them is that when it comes to the setup, you need to always have your feet planted on the ground, your butt always in contact with the bench, and your shoulder blades also always in contact with the bench. The bar is only allowed to move down when you are lowering the bar to your chest, and it's only allowed to move up when you are pressing it off of your chest. The commands are simply going to be the start command. Once the lifter has brought the bar out in front, they are allowed a handoff for that. But once they have it at the top and they're under their own power and the spotter has left the platform, at that point the start command will be given. The lifter is allowed to lower that bar, and once it comes down to the chest, it has to stop there and pause there. Once the lifter shows command of the bar, so it's not moving anymore, at that point the head judge will yell press, and then the lifter is allowed to extend the arms. At this point, the bar is not allowed to move down. Any downward motion is enough for a red light. But once the bar is all the way at the top, the lifter shows command of the bar and it's fully locked out for as far as they are capable of doing. At that point, the head judge will then yell rack. The lifter then racks the bar, and that is it. There are a couple things also that should be mentioned. One is that the lifter has to have their thumbs wrapped around the bar, and if they are using wrist wraps, the thumb loop in the wrist wrap must not be around the thumb. So we'll talk a little bit more about the equipment at the very end, but I did want to pop that in here as a little bit of a spoiler on that, because wrist wraps are a good tool to use when it comes to adding stability into the bench. Now, let's talk about the setup, because the setup is the most important part about the bench. It is what makes or breaks the bench. And there are, simply put, 2 levels of the setup itself. We'll just show you the simplest, the least complex, and the most complex, and theoretically you can go at any point in between for your own specific athlete that you're working with based off of their own capability. But to keep it simple for this presentation, we're just going to think about 2 different methods. We'll talk a little bit about some of the in-betweens later on when we get to the different levels of teaching, but for, again, us just basically understanding what the bench press is at the beginning, it's simply going to be 2. The first one is just following the basic requirements. You're lying on the back of the bench, your butt is in contact, your shoulder blades are in contact, and your feet are in contact with the ground. At that point, it's just a matter of lowering the bar to your chest and then pressing it off your chest. Theoretically, that's going to be the simplest bench there is. The setup specifically is just lie back on the bench, place your feet flat on the ground, grab the barbell with your thumbs wrapped around the bar, and then that's it. We're not going to worry about any arching. We're not going to worry about leg drive or foot pressure or anything along those lines for this specific least complex style. But the most complex style we'll go over next. And this is where you get into the really high level of lifting that not every Special Olympian is going to be capable of. So keep that in mind. But when you do find someone who is truly capable, make sure you actually go through the effort and give them the best possible setup. That's going to give them the best possible lift. So here we have the full-blown complex setup, and there are some very key components of it that we're going to be going over. So the first thing to look at is going to be, how do you get into position? And you'll notice that at the very start of this example, you're going to see me sitting all the way back against the bar. So here I am with my feet all the way back. I slide my butt forward while keeping my feet where they are, shove my body down to create as big of an arch as I can get, and then bring my feet flat. I am now in the most locked in that I can be as far as my lower body goes. I have pressure being put out against my knees. I've got pressure going down onto my heels, and I am driving my shoulder blades into the bench as hard as I can in order to create the most stability possible. So when you really break it down, you can look at it in these 8 specific steps. First, we start with the lifter seated all the way back into the bar and then slide all the way forward. At this point, what we are doing is building in a lot of leg tension. So we keep feet back while we slide forward, and then we reach our arms backwards to go ahead and get into the almost like the letter C that's just rotated weirdly. So then, once I've got myself back there, I then use the rack itself to push me down the bench. So you'll notice my hands are on the back. I'm pushing my upper body down while keeping my feet still back. So it's a little uncomfortable, honestly, but what we're doing is creating an arch, and that arch is going to limit the range of motion that the bar has to go through. The smaller the range of motion, the greater the weight that can eventually be lifted. So now that we've got the shoulder blades slid down the bench, we're going to try to position it so that the barbell is above the forehead. And then we're going to start pushing the shoulder blades as hard into the bench as can, and then slide the feet forward until we have the most tension possible while having feet flat on the ground, as that is a requirement for the competitions. So our hip position has now stabilized. We have tension going through the entire body, and what we're going to start doing is pressing out against the knees in order to really lock in the hips even further. Use that to help drive ourselves up the bench, but because we have a really solid pressure buildup from where the shoulder blades are going down into the bench, when you try to slide back, or I guess I should point this way, when you try to slide back against the bench this way, what we're doing is really reinforcing that arch. And as we reinforce that arch, we get more stable. The more stable you are, the better platform you have to lift off of. At this point, we grab the barbell and we're going to get a thumbs wrapped position, specifically as wide as is competition legal. That way, again, we can further limit the range of motion. The wider your hands are, the smaller the range of motion. The closer your hands come in together, then you have to push that bar even longer because you have to then basically go the entire length of your arm. These are the strategies that matter when you're trying to get into that really upper echelon of powerlifting. So you'll see then that the last little part of the setup, if you want to count as part of the setup, is how the unrack happens. And I'm debating about whether or not that actually is part of the setup or part of the actual lift, but I'm just going to point it out here for you that when you look at where the bar ends up, it's going to be right above the shoulders. So the whole entire arm is perpendicular to the ground, and that's where the start position should be. Okay, so let's go ahead and analyze now the actual reps. We're going to start it from where pretty much that video ended off. So here you have the initial unrack taking place. You have the grip in that optimized portion that I was just talking about, where you have the hand as far out as you can comfortably have it, thumb wrapped around, and we have the setup all locked in. So you can see here I've got the arch taking place. I've got pressure on my feet. My legs are really locked in and tight, and you can see that my body is pretty stable. So we have the rack height made so that way as the bar clears the rack, I don't lose the tightness here in my lats. I'm not going to go ahead up and have it high enough so that when I unrack, my shoulders go forward and I then lose all of that shoulder blade stability that we built up with the setup. From here, we're going to go ahead and bring that barbell out and do it in a way where you add to the brace, where we're going to be using your lats to bring that bar down and really grip it tightly. So then from this position, we can take our big breath in and brace hard. Even though it's not a squat or a deadlift, you still want to incorporate that brace. That brace is really key in making sure that you are stable, and stability is so important for a bench. Because if you end up moving and you lose your stability and the bar falls out of its groove, then you're screwed. That point, that lift is lost. There is a very small room for error when it comes to a heavy bench. With a deadlift, with a squat, you have more room to kind of muscle and wiggle around, but with bench, you don't. If you fall out of your groove, you've lost that lift. So then what you got to do is really reinforce that arch as you bring that bar down. So you are going to simultaneously pull that bar down into your chest while you bring the chest up to meet that bar. So when you get into the very bottom position, you're going to see that arch is still there completely, and my upper arm, like the bicep tricep area, is going to be almost parallel to the floor, instead of having that elbow dipping way down like you'll see happen with a lot of people who have a flat back. That's the advantage of the arch. And you can see that right here. The bar touches that chest, but look at how it touches the chest. It doesn't sink into the chest. It just makes contact, and then because of all of the stability that you've built up from the foot pressure, the knees being pressed out, your hips being locked down, shoulder blades being driven into the bench, and you driving yourself backwards towards your head, towards the spotter, you are so locked in that you can just touch your chest, hold it still. You have your back flexed in order to keep that bar in the position it needs to be in. And from this really rigid position, there's no sinking of that bar into the chest. There's no weird bouncing that happens. It's just touch, hold, and then you go ahead and press. That is the way that that bench should go. But a key thing about how that press takes place is that it happens on an arc. And with that arc, you're actually going to have it happen in a way where it's not in a straight line. That's why arc is used. And this is what that means. When you are benching and you're here, the top is like this, where your arm is straight. But if I'm actually coming down low on my chest, then you'll notice my arm dips below what the camera can see. And then it's going to come back into camera view because it's hanging out over here. The forearm is always perpendicular to the ground. Just pretend that I'm 90 degrees this way. So here's what it'll look like if you can see a little bit more. If I sit up a little higher, now you can see here, if I come down, my hands go low, and you can see them at the bottom of, well, you kind of can't, but here we go. You can see them at the bottom of my chest right here. So if this is the bottom, this is the top, you can see how this is happening at kind of a diagonal. That's what you want. You want to do that diagonal intentionally. What you don't want to do is keep it up here the whole time, and then you get crunched because you have to go ahead and come down almost to your throat. If you do that, that's actually called a guillotine press because it's coming down straight into your throat. That's not advantageous when it comes to trying to maximize the weight. So the powerlifting strategy requires shoulders down, tension, and having the bar come low on the chest. So keep that in mind when you are looking at bar patterns. You want to make sure that you have that arc of going to shoulder level to low on the chest, and keeping your forearms perpendicular to the ground that entire time. Those are key parts of that bar path. Now, you as a coach are going to be responsible for doing the handoffs that don't bring a lifter out of their position. So one of the key things before the handoff has even started is that you need to make sure the rack height is where it needs to be. So remember, if you have to pull it up so high that their shoulders get pulled forward, then that rack height is too high. What you want to do is make sure you do a handoff gently. So here is me giving a handoff, and you'll notice that I stay close to the bar, I lift up slightly, and then I gently, gradually release my hands. That way the lifter doesn't just have potentially a couple hundred pounds just dropped into their hands. You want to lift it up gradually, just enough to get them into position, and then just slowly come off that bar. That way they're not surprised with a few hundred pounds potentially. And you want to make sure that you do it slowly so they can make sure they can keep their setup. A bad handoff is a handoff that pulls the lifter out of their stable position. You want to keep that lifter in the stable position. Proper rack height, gradual handoff, and then make sure that you get out of their way. Don't keep your hands on the bar. Do not keep your hands on the bar. If you keep your hands on the bar, then they're not doing the lift, you're contributing. And you want to make sure that you can be close enough to grab it if needed, but you do not touch that bar. And then when it comes time to rack it, that's when you can go ahead and be a little faster about it. A lot of people will just rack it on their own, but remember, you as a coach, you got to tell them to hold it, and then rack it back. That's going to be on you to give those commands while this is happening. Now, the biggest thing is to make sure that you guys coordinate about, for one, who does the counting. If no one's counting, well, then how are you going to time it well? If only one person is counting, make sure it's agreed upon who is going to be doing that. Granted, some lifters that we work with are going to be a little gung-ho and just start going for it, in which case you just got to know who that is and just be ready for it. So while they're in the middle of their setup, the moment they get their hands on the bar, that's when you get into position and you start to pull up some pressure. So when they do just bring it out in front of them, that you're ready to make sure they're not putting their shoulders in a vulnerable position. So to put some numbers on that, let's say someone is benching 120 pounds and they just like to get set up, grab it, and go. Well, then the moment that they grab it, your hands are on the bar and you're already taking off about 50 pounds or so. So that way, when they do just go for it, you're ready. You've taken off some of the weight from them and you can increase their safety with that rack. Okay, so now let's get into the actual teaching of the lifts themselves. Okay, so for level 1 of teaching the bench, you just keep it to the absolute bare bones. As long as they are lying on the back and their feet are flat, then their setup is fine. At that point, it's just lower the bar to the chest and then press up. These are going to be reps that you are looking mostly to have the lifter control the speed more so than anything else. That way they're not just plopping that bar down on their chest and wishing for the best. We want to make sure that we can start teaching them control. That's really the big priority, because we can't go beyond level 1 if the lifter does not know how to control a barbell. The last thing you want to do is start giving them extra variables to try to control, and then next thing you know, there's 0 bar control and we're having weight plates slide off one side because they're going all lopsided, or worse, they drop the barbell on themselves. So if they're staying at level 1, you're focused on having them control and learn how the barbell behaves. Then theoretically, once they get that, we can go ahead and get into the next level. Then we can get into level 2, where we start trying to have them incorporate some of the breathing into play when they are doing these lifts. And that means get them to start timing their breath. And we're going to keep it really simple. They're still working on learning control of the barbell itself and learning how their body moves and responds to having weight in their hand. So keep it simple. If the bar is coming down, you are holding your breath, which means you have to take a big breath before the barbell gets lowered. So you have to let them understand that distinction in terms of the breathing, because we don't want them necessarily breathing in while they're coming down, because then they're going to probably have some trouble with timing breathing out. So we take that out of the equation. They unrack, and then it's okay. Big breath in, hold that breath, bring that bar all the way down while holding the breath, and then once they start to push, that's when they breathe out. So it's big breath in, just like that. And you'll work with the athlete themselves and just keep on reminding them. A lot of teaching of this stage is going to be completely reliant on how you cue the lifter. So you can usually tell that I'm working with someone without even looking, because you're going to hear me telling them components of the lift. So for this one, it could easily sound like this, with like, okay, 1, 2, 3, all right, that's the handoff. So 1, 2, 3, okay, hold the bar there, hold your breath, all right, hold your breath, lower it, touch your chest, press and breathe out, all right, hold it there, big breath in, hold your breath as that bar comes down, touch your chest, pause, press. Okay, let your breath out as you press. And I'll go on like that. And there'll be so many different small variations of that, but the main thing is to note that each component of the lift is being told to the athlete as it's happening. And if you can consistently do that, they'll get that repetition. They'll get that extra bit of reinforced learning that will help them transition and eventually maybe get into the next level. So when we look at level 3, it's very similar to level 2, but now we're getting into a really fine level of breath control. If you can mix in some bracing into this, that would be fantastic. However, I don't think that's the main priority. The extra thing beyond just controlling breathing that I would say starts happening level 3 is the way that the lifter positions their wrists. So if we are having a barbell in our hand, then we look at it in terms of where is it in relation to the wrist. We know it's not going to go like this because then the barbell would just fall out of their hands. Actually, let me bring up the big camera on this one. So if they have the bar in their hands like this, then it's just going to fall out. So we can safely say this is not going to happen. What usually happens is they want to spend less effort holding it. So they just go like this. And when they were holding like this and pressing up, then what happens is that the barbell ends up resting over air and the wrist gets torqued and the wrist has to deal with a ton of pressure here. Realistically, we want it to be straight. We want to have the barbell over the wrist, over the forearm the entire time. This is going to be a much more stable position to press from. A lot of them do this. So what we can do is start working on the fine-tuning the breathing and mixing in, okay, get that bar over. And this is one of the things that wrist wraps will come into play with for some people. It can be a tool. You can use wrist wraps to help it so they can't quite get back because it's resisting their ability to bring that wrist all the way back because the wrist wrap is providing some of that support that they may not be using. Now, the difference in terms of the actual breathing itself is that now what we want to do is hold the breath for the hard part of the lift, which is different than holding it for the down and then breathing out on the up. We now want to start breathing out at the halfway point up. So we have more lines involved now. Instead of just hold and then press up, it's now hold, and then as you press and halfway up, you're still holding. Then once you hit that halfway mark, that's when you start letting your breath out to come up and finish the up. This is based in the need for stability. If you are holding your breath, you are stable and you can maintain the position required to have the best leverage possible. Once you start breathing out, your chest starts to collapse and you start losing that arch to a minor degree, but enough of a degree that it will change the leverage of your lift. So you have to tell them in terms of the cueing, all right, so hold at the top, big breath in, hold that breath, press, hold breath, and breathe out. And you have to time it like that for them. And so you keep reinforcing it because this one is tricky because there's not a simple divider of the bar is on your chest and the bar is then pushed off your chest, and that's when you breathe. This is now an arbitrary position part way up in the middle of a motion. That can be hard for some of the athletes to get the difference of, so just be patient. Just be patient. Level 4, we get to a little bit of the setup. And now what we're going to start doing is an abbreviated setup where we're going to start focusing on their ability to bring their legs into play, because we're trying to get them to turn the bench into a full body exercise. So now we're going to start adding in, okay, we want you to have your feet wide. Give yourself a nice stable base. Be balanced. What you're going to then do is push out against your knees and try to bring your feet down into that floor hard. But we have to make sure their setup is good enough that when they do that, their butt doesn't come off that bench. Remember the powerlifting rules. We need to have that butt in contact with that bench the whole time. And if their butt rises off the bench, then those side judges are going to give 2 red lights and the lift is going to be no good, even if they successfully completed it in the eyes of that head judge. So pressure goes out against the knees, the feet get locked down, and you start employing leg drive and greater stability with that arch with this abbreviated setup. It's not the full thing, but it's enough to get the basics there. And at that point, we're going to do the same breathing that we did in level 3. So we're building off of that by adding in that extra bit of leg drive. We keep the pressure on the knees the entire time throughout the lift, especially during that pause, especially during that press that comes in afterwards. But what we want to do is really start to reinforce that wrist position as well when we get to level 4, because these lifters that are going to get into these higher levels are going to be lifting greater weight, and we want to make sure their joints are in the proper position for not just the strength aspect, but also for the safety aspect. We don't want those joints getting worn down. Now, we can also get more into the bar path here, so we want to make sure that lockout happens above the shoulder and that bar is brought down lower on the chest. That bar path is going to be big, especially when we get into level 5. So for level 5, we need to teach that full setup. I have a few athletes that are doing this complete setup, and it has really, really helped them. But what I want you to understand before we really get into it again, that there are a lot of specific lines of pressure that are happening simultaneously. So if you can compare this level 4 picture, all we're doing is focusing on basically the knees down. We have knees being pressed out and the pressure down on the foot itself. But there's a lot more that happens above the knee with these pressures that we're trying to build. So here we have the same pressures, but also we're trying to, with that leg pressure, with that black arrow that's on my shirt over here, we're adding in a little bit more of forcing yourself backwards in that direction. So we are forcing the legs back, but at the same time we are pulling here using our lats and putting pressure in the opposite direction. That's going to help us get the arch in the spine to limit our range of motion and be more strategic about how we bench. So we have that pressure complementing each other to create that arch, but we are also going to further enhance that arch by bringing the chest up to the bar as it goes down into that pause. And we're also going to increase the stability by using our lats and our back muscles to pull that bar down into the chest while we bring that chest up. And all of this leads into a lot of different arrows of force that all are necessary. If one of these arrows is not happening, then this lifter is missing out on stability, and it's more likely that they will collapse while they are trying to do the bench press. We do not want that to happen. So keep this in mind. This is really, really, really hard to teach, and this takes a long time. But you have to be patient, and it takes a bit of experience when you're looking at a lifter to be able to tell if one of these arrows are missing. So here's a little trick. One of the things you can do if you are watching from the side is you look at how far down the elbow goes, and you can use a reference point that is fixed. So the best one is going to be the bench itself. If a lifter, when they are nailing this kind of an arch, that elbow comes in and it ends up meeting the bottom of the bench right at this point, and it does that every time when they are good, then you have a marker. You know if that elbow dips down below there, then their chest did collapse. And you can tell them, hey, your chest collapsed on that one. Let's bring that chest up. Oh, okay. And then their next rep, that elbow slides up and their range of motion is decreased. There are other things you can look for, like the bar path. If their bar path is normally really nice and smooth, but on one you notice it hits the bottom and then it kind of just falls an inch and then comes back up, that's another clear sign that they did not have the full arch, and therefore the bar ended up going farther than it was meant to, and it kind of just fell for that last inch instead of being lowered and stable. Lot to think about, but be aware. So we're going to look at this setup again, because now you understand those forces. Look at this for the forces involved. So you can see I create that compression using the feet back method. Then I slide down, and you'll notice that as I come down, you have me pull that bar. And I teased it a little bit at the beginning when I talked about how my lats are going to come in and grab that bar and keep me tight. And you can see how I'm primed because of all of the stability that I've built up through this setup. It's going to lead to a very rigid bench. So let's take a look at what it looks like with reps happening. Here's the setup. We have me sliding down. We have me setting up, getting my feet nice and flat, keeping my arch, getting my comfortable grip, thumbs wrapped, and then unrack without losing my shoulder stability, compress using my lats and my back at the same time, and I bring my chest up to the bar, and you'll notice there's no collapse in that chest. And you can see that as far as I'm lowering it, my elbow ends up being about even with the top of that bench. And so I can use that marker when I'm doing this to judge whether my chest has collapsed. Or you can also pick one of the tiles or cinder blocks that are in that wall, and you can use that cinder block line as a reference point for where my chest is. So if we look at my chest, it is right in line with that cinder block line if you just extrapolate how far it would go. And if we watch all of these reps, I should stay right about where that line is. And you'll notice that I'm doing a decent job of it. The chest stays up. But this is something that's going to collapse a lot in the lifters that you are working with. So keep that in mind. Find reference points so you can spot things and let them know. That's going to be a huge aspect to this. But let's talk a little bit more about other things. Pressure is being maintained in the feet and the knees. That's one part of the reasons why this looks stable. I am doing a solid job of holding my breath as I come down and then breathing out after I have pressed the bar a little bit. You can tell that because I'm not collapsing while that bar is close to my chest. You can see that I'm moving that bar on that arcing pattern, so it goes low on my chest and then it rises up. So you can see the barbell comes closer to the camera and then farther away. It's unfortunately not quite possible to get a single camera angle that shows everything perfectly, but you can still see the gist of that bar path in this one. Not perfect, but you can understand the point. So when you are working with your athlete, you want to make sure that you always meet them where they are. There are some lifters that are going to be forever at level 2. And they will never be able to get to level 3, and you have to be okay with that. Just try to make their level 2 the best that it can possibly be. If you can sneak in aspects of a higher level and they're able to grasp onto that, then do it. The different levels are not strictly what they are because it's the only option. They are to show you a possible progression, and it's a good way to differentiate between different levels of execution, but it doesn't mean that a lifter whose form is always going to look like level 1 can't take an aspect from level 3 or 4. An example of that's definitely going to be wishy-washy and where you can employ it is the wrists. If someone is only doing level 1, but they have great wrists, then that doesn't mean that they are all of a sudden supposed to not do the good wrist. No, they can take that aspect that we start introducing on level 3 and use it on level 1. It's all individual. None of these things that we're talking about are the only answer. For example, I'm talking so much about the setup and how it's important, and this is how you do the setup, but guess what? There are other ways of getting into the exact same position. This is just a method that has a little more security involved with it that makes it more repeatable. Having those feet starting back is a reminder to not let them go too far forward, and it helps them have a reference point on where they need to stay stretched in terms of their back arch. So it helps. This is all designed to have specific cues to feel that the lifter can then use to improve themselves and their lifts. But we want to make sure that we also don't rush them to levels that they're not ready for. It would be amazing if every single one of the athletes that we train can be a level 5 bencher, but the reality of it is that that's just not going to be the case. So don't rush them to the next level. And then you have the fact that they're going to mess up. Everyone messes up. And you can't, in my opinion, you can't lie to them. Don't tell them they're doing amazingly when they're doing terribly. But be careful on how you give critiques. There are some lifters that are honestly flat out frustrating to work with because you'll say, hey, the lift was pretty solid, but like when you were benching, like your wrists were way back and we've been working on having them straight. And you'll get hit with, no, my wrists were straight. And they'll be completely serious about that. So you have to be ready for that sometimes you're going to get a kickback when you try to give them critique. So keep that in mind and don't let it frustrate you. Just understand and reinforce that, no, your wrists were back. They may, and you may want to give them a little something like they were probably a little better than the first set, but we still need to get them farther up. So a lot of the times, like one of the things that I'll say is, yes, that was great, but we can make it better. So I always want to have positivity in with the critique because you still want to make sure that these guys come back. And the last thing you want to do is just be such a negative person towards them that they feel all you do is insult them and therefore they're never going to come back. The big truth of all this is that we're actually not interested in creating a crew of the best powerlifters in the entire world. The real goal of all this is getting them excited about training and getting excited about being stronger and taking care of themselves and moving, because we have to remember the population we're working with is one that gets neglected more often than not. So you need to make sure that you can bring positivity and encouragement while being honest and help them be as great as they can possibly be. Give them your real critiques. The majority of them will take that and be thankful for that. But remember, still all individual. You're going to have ones that are going to be better or worse about taking that critique, and keep that in mind. So now let's talk a little bit more about some of those equipment aspects. And I talked about wrist wraps a couple times now, but I want to show you an example. So here is me showing the maximum amount that I can bend my hand when I have my wrist wrap wrapped properly. You can see it's not nearly as much as I could theoretically be doing, because you can compare. Here is that same hand going all the way back to almost a 90-degree angle between my forearm and how far my hand goes. But with the wrist wrap, it's not even close to 90 degrees. And so for a lot of people, that can be helpful. One of the things that is also very subjective, but you'll see a lot of the times is going to be belts. Realistically, you don't need a belt when it comes to benching, but some people benefit from having a little bit of that extra security, and it makes them feel comfortable, and maybe psychologically it makes them feel like a power lifter. And if that's the case, let them wear the belt. It's not going to harm anything. It's just another step in the process that then has to be handled. So it's not terrible. Let them. Now, chalking when it comes to benching is an aspect that can definitely be skipped depending on the gym, because some gyms don't allow chalk, in which case you gotta skip it. But if you are in a situation where your gym does allow chalk and the benches themselves are having a bit to be desired in terms of how sticky they actually are, then you can actually sometimes, depending on the material, put chalk on the shoulder blades of the lifter and then have them drive into the bench, and it will help them stick a little bit better. So it can be a tool to help make a poorly designed bench more like a competition bench, because that's a trait of competition benches, is that they are stickier, so that lifters can really drive the shoulder blades without having them slide along the bench. To some degree, it is actually a safety concern. If the lifter is going to have a bunch of weight in their hands and then slide across the bench and fall off the bench, well, then that's a hazard, and we don't want to have that happen. So one of the things you can do to help that is to chalk their back even for a bench. It's obvious on a squat, but the same principles actually apply between a squat and a bench for chalking your back. That takes us to the end. If you actually managed to watch all of this in one sitting, I commend you. I have no idea how long I've been talking. So I want to thank you for that. I also want to thank Empower You. They've been fantastic about working with the Chester County Special Olympics powerlifting team. They're the main reason why I've been able to do what I've been able to do for the team. Empower You does a great job working with individuals with autism and IDD to ensure that they get as much support as we can provide when it comes to training. So if you are in the southeastern PA area, you can go ahead and check out empowerusf.com. And since we are a PA waiver provider, you can potentially get training for free. There are a lot of coaches that are involved, and everyone does a great job of being as inclusive as they possibly can be. So I want to give a huge shout out to Empower You for helping with the Special Olympics powerlifting team here in Chester County and doing everything that they do. I've been incredibly happy to partner with them, and I got to give them all the credit that they deserve. So thank you for watching. If you need anything more from me, there are more resources for coaching Special Olympics powerlifting on YouTube and my website. So you can go to adaptablestrength.com. You can go to youtube.com/@adaptablestrength. A lot of the resources that I'm making are currently on Instagram. If you want some short form instruction there, it's Instagram and the same thing, Adaptable Strength. But also, if you just feel like email me directly and just skipping all of that other red tape and all that, just go ahead and do that. Alex@adaptablestrength.com. Thank you. I appreciate you watching, and just remember that you're not in this alone.